Hello. Welcome to my studio. Oh, hello, welcome to my studio. Maybe you heard me say that twice. Hopefully this is recording. I'm doing a new setup today. Some other things didn't work earlier, and we'll see how everything goes today. So I'm glad you joined me. I'm guessing that some of you are here because you are weavers and you've been using a warping board like this. And now you're thinking it's time to change to use a warping mill. Or perhaps you are someone who is just curious as to how weavers actually put their yarn or get their yarn ready to put on the loom. So maybe those are reasons why you're here. Whatever reason you're here, I'm glad you are. I'm going to start talking again. These are my ideas. There are many ideas out there. And I'm going to start by talking a little bit about the two different tools. I'd like you to know that I am filming this on my own, and I put in the comments if you have any questions, please type them in and I'll get back to you at the end, or you could also send me private messages and I'd be happy to answer them that way. I'm not going to talk about all the calculations that are needed to do the measurements. I'm basically just going to show you the difference between the two tools and how the warping mill is maybe a way to make your life a little bit easier. So first of all, let's take a look at the warping board. Well, we have the warping board. Most of the warping boards are about a yard in width. That's what this one is. This one happens to be made by a company called Shat out of Colorado, and this warping board will make a warp up to about 14.5 yards long. There are other warping boards that are 4 yards, there's some that are 9, there's some that are 12, and you can see that it's a basic rectangular shape. You can use it this way, and some people, if they have different space, they might turn it this way. So you have a couple of options of using a warping board. Now with a warping board, as some of you know, most weavers use them, you of course would be turned toward me, the pegs would be toward me, and you would stand and you would make your warp back and forth or up and down if you turn it the other way. So there's a limitation in the size. You're limited in how long a warp you can make, unless you want to have someone make you one to hang on your wall and you can make it as long as you want, but you need a really big wall for that. The other problem that happens, at least in my home with a warping board, is I end up hanging yarn on it and other things on it. So when I want to go to use it, I have to take everything off. So anyway, those are ideas with a warping board, and you could also make one. Now, why in the world do we want to go to a warping mill? Well, the warping mill, a couple of things. Right away, rather than moving your arm back and forth, you're going to be turning it around like that. Right? The other thing with a warping mill is a warping mill can also be collapsible. The top pieces, these pieces that are the crosses here, the wooden, can come off, and then you can collapse it, take it apart, and store it in the corner. This particular warping mill is made by Harrisville. There's a lot of companies out there that make them. This one is what we would call a vertical warping mill. So we could also take it and move it the other direction, and you would have it this direction, so you could then wind your warp this direction. I have a very large one that's just like this one. You put it down, it's the other direction. It's about 4 or 5 feet long, and I can actually wind a warp, according to the instructions, up to 60 yards. I've never done it. I've only done warps up to about 30 yards. And just for an example, a 30-yard warp might be, well, this one's probably about 20, maybe 25 yards. It started out as white yarn, and what I did was I dyed it, and it's going to be for scarves. This happens to be 24 ends per inch. Now today, though, we're not going to do 24 ends per inch. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a couple of tricks. At least I think they're tricks, and I've learned them from some other weavers. The first trick that I'm going to say, or maybe it's not a trick, it's more of efficiency. A lot of us don't like to make warps because they take too long, and you don't know how to make it. Maybe it's not made properly and they don't go on your loom correctly. So the first thing that I learned to do was to buy yarn, 2 cones exactly the same color. Now this yarn happens to be wool and silk blend, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a warp and then I'm going to dye it. So I'm going to take these two, they're going to be put on the floor so they're kind of out of your sight. And then the other thing that I do, I put a little loop on the end, and I'm going to use that to put on the warping mill. Now, the other thing is, how do I know how much yarn to put on? Well, today I decided 5 yards. It's kind of hard to see, but there's a red guideline, and you'll see it better once I start making the warp. The guide is 5 yards long. So that's exactly how long the warp is that I'm going to make. However, I want you to think about this for a minute. I'm going to do 4 inches at 10 ends per inch, 5 yards, but in the end, I'm going to have a 2.5 yard warp, and it's going to be 8 inches wide. So if you're a weaver, go ahead and put that in the back of your mind. If you're not a weaver and you're just watching this out of curiosity, I'll just keep watching and see how things go. Again, this is my idea, my way of doing it. There's a lot of other ways out there. All right, so I have my little loop. Again, I'm sorry I can't do close-ups today. I'm going to put the loop on the end here. And like I said, I'm going to put my finger in between. And that's going to keep the yarn separate. So I said I'm doing 2 at a time, 10 ends per inch. Well, I only have to go 5 times. Now what I'm doing at the top, I'm doing a crisscross. And let me do the 5 and then I'll explain if you are not a weaver. So this is 2. Now I'm on 3. 4. And now we're doing 5. So what's going on up here? Well, what's going on is that if I could take my fingers and cross them like that, literally what's happening is each thread, or actually sets of threads, are 2 at a time. The reason we do that, they're going to be separate. So when we go to put them on the loom, as we take them and thread them onto the heddles, each one will come off separately and they won't get all tangled. So they're kind of crisscrossing. That's what the cross is all about. So if you're not new to weaving, that's what that's all about. Now, I just did 5. Another trick someone showed me is, or actually 10, I'm going to take another cord and I loop it. Again, I'm sorry we can't, you can also just do an overhead knot. That tells me I just did 1 inch. All right? The reason I do that is that I warp back to front, and I'm going to show you something in a moment. So let me count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Or I could be counting by 2s and saying 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Either way. All right. Now, I just realized that I did forget something. So I'll try to go back and explain that in a minute. Typically, what I would do is I did the 10, and I did a little cross here. Love live demonstrations. So now I'm going to group this again. Okay, so I have 2 inches. If I was going to do something maybe 20 inches wide, right away, if something happened like someone was at the door, the dog needed attention, the kids are crying, I could stop, and then when I came back, I knew I have 20. I have 10, 2 groups of 10. So that's one reason I do that. The other reason I do that is I take this particular device, a rattle, and my rattle is 1 inch increments. So when I'm finished, these sections are in 1 inch increments. All right, I just told you I made a little mistake. So what I'm going to do is I'm just not going to worry about it at the moment, but I am going to tie across at the bottom. I'm going to tie a group at the bottom. Now I have to make a mental note that this is not 1 inch, it's actually 2 inches together. But I'm going to show you why I did that in a minute and why I'm doing a cross at the top and the bottom. So let's go again and let's do the next set, the next inch. So let's go 2, count by 2s this time, 2, 4, 6, 8, and 10. All right, so here I go again. Again, you can do any kind of a knot that you'd like. I happen to do a little loop up there. And like I said, I'm going to loop it down here. I'm trying not to get the red cord in the guide cord. If it gets stuck, you just take it out. So I am making across the top and the bottom. Again, that's another little trick that someone told me about doing, and I actually haven't done much of it. All right, so let's do it again. I'm going to do my last of the 4 inches. 2, 4, 6, 8, and excuse me, I wasn't counting right there, and 10. This is actually 10. And if I'm not sure, like I said, because I was talking, I can go back now and make sure. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, so when I get distracted or we're talking, that happens. All right, so I'm going to do another little loop there. Same thing at the bottom. And if I was finished, and this was 5 yards, I'm basically done. Now, what do you do from here on? Well, one thing I do is we cut the end. And I don't know if you can tell, I'm just going to do a square knot. I like to have a loop at both ends because of the way that I happen to put yarn on my loom. So now, there's our chain work. The other thing you want to do when you're doing this, you want to stay fairly close to your guide. You probably don't want to do too many inches. You notice I'm not real concerned about spreading them out evenly, as long as it's not pulled up very high. So now the next thing we want to do is we want to tie our crosses. I happen to use recycled, pantyhose, leotards. They stretch nicely, and since I do a lot of dyeing, they don't take the dye up when I'm dyeing something. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to do the cross at the top, which means I'm tying it on each side, and I'm going to tie it very tight because that's very important. You don't want to lose that. I'm going to do the same thing at the bottom. Oh, wrong side. All right, right over here. Again, these are things you can probably look at on other videos or close-up of diagrams to see exactly what's going on. So that one's tied. Now, we also have a couple other areas that I happen to like to tie. I like to tie both sides of the chain. You can apply some of these methods to a working board too. So that's kind of nice about watching this. If you're saying, oh, I don't think I can afford a working mill, I don't really want to go there yet, I'm showing you some things that you can do for working boards too. Again, this is my idea. There's a lot of much more experienced weavers out there that have really good ideas too. You can check them out. So if you normally do a warping board, you probably tie it at every yard. This is 72 inches around, or 2 yards. So instead of tying every single time, I'm going to skip a section. So again, I'm trying not to get the guide thread in there. So I have one there. I'm going to skip. I'm going to do this one. Weavers like to have things nice and tidy and neat. The tidier and neater you are, the more likely you'll have a nice warp that's going to go on your loom fairly smoothly without a lot of trouble. Sometimes it happens to do with the kind of yarn you're using and some other things. All right, so I'm going to do one more. All right, so there we go. All right, so now we're going to take it off and we're going to make a chain, which is always was kind of one of those like, what? Chain is really crocheting with your hand. With this particular warping mill, I can take the pegs out, which makes it a little bit easier and already loosens a little bit. So I have everything nice and secure. This one does not have a break. If I had a break, it would slow it down as I'm unwinding. It didn't come with one, and some of you know my husband could probably make one for me, but I'm going to use it without the break. So right now we're pretending this is just a 5-yard warp. So I'm going, as you can tell, I'm chaining, I'm putting it through like I'm doing a crochet, like my hand is a big hook, going through. Now I'm not doing this real tight right now because I am going to take it apart in a moment because I want to show you something else. All right, so here we are. Okay, so let's say, well, see, I did get that caught in there, so I'm going to take that out of there. Don't want that red in there. All right, so right now, my chain is ready to go to put on the loom, if that's the way I want it. But like I said, I really did 8 inches. So what I did was I did half the work. So I'm going to take this apart. Hopefully this will work. This I didn't try yet, so I didn't practice this part of the activity. So we'll see what happens. So here's the cross right here. I'm going to take 2 sticks, which we call leaf sticks. I'm going to put them in the cross, in the one cross, and I'm going to take it and I'm going to put it in the other cross. Hey, looky there. So technically, if you're following along and you understand what I'm talking about weaving wise, I now have 8 inches, 4 and 4 to put in the loom. So again, I've cut my time in half. I'm able to do that. This works if your pattern is symmetrical or if it's all one color. Now I will go back and do the chain on this to make it nice and tidy. And then what I happen to have, made something that I found years ago. I have some nice little straps because I don't want this to slide off. So I'm going to connect it, make another connection over on this side, and I have another set here, another side. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. Slide it through, snap it, slide it through, snap it, and now with this nice little device I can take this and go and hang it onto my loom, and I can start either front to back. It doesn't matter. Like I said, I happen to use back to front, and then these little sections that I just did, these inch sections, when I prepare it on the loom, I will put it in the rattle, and I will have a nice little, neat warp. However, I'm going to dye this particular warp. So I would put it back down on the table perhaps to make it nice and tidy, and again, take the little crochet hook of my hand, slide it through, keep it nice and tidy, maybe make it a little bit tighter. So that is my way of making a warp using a warping mill. So if you have any questions, I'll be happy to look over the questions that you have, and I will type in any answers. And otherwise, thank you very much for joining me today. I'll be having this video up maybe for a short time, for a couple of days, and I might take it down. Just want to help some people out. And again, happy weaving.